All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome. Hope you enjoyed lunch. We are going to go over data import here, kind of a two-parter situation for this session. My name is Ryan Taylor. I am product owner for data import. I'm going to be going over some details on the current state of data import and where we might be going in the future. In Ramson, Sunflower, and all the wonderful things that come after that. Um, uh, and then after that, I'll turn it over to Jennifer, Christy, and Yael, who will go over some tips and tricks, some updates to documentation on the wiki, and other such fun stuff. So let me get rolling here with my deck here on the data import roadmap. So quick agenda to go with this. I'll be going over the current state of data import, some of the long-term goals we have for the app, what to expect from Ramsons, what you might be able to expect from Sunflower, and other features we're considering for the future. So I wanted to open up this deck with a shout out. I didn't want to lose track of time and forget to thank anyone. So covering data import takes a lot of different folks. And I really appreciate all the help I've had in formulating what I'm about to present here, getting feedback from folks in the data import subgroup, MMSig, and also developers that I'm working with. So I want to, on the record, shout out Katerina Sanchenko, Maria Aloshina, who are leads on the Foliage team, who works on data import, as well as Olamide Kalawale, our solutions architect, and Martin Tran, our development manager, who really helped to formulate and identify the capabilities of data import today and where we can see it going in the future. And hugest of shout outs to the data import subgroup, who many of folks are here either in person, perhaps right next to me, and online. I really appreciate all the feedback I get from folks. It's greatly appreciated, and it's really helping to give us a vision for the future for data import. So thanks so much, everyone. Moving into the meat and potatoes here. The current state of data import, I want to cover some strengths, weaknesses, and some recent developments. So what you see on the slide here is a lot of details pulled from subgroup meetings, conversations in our Slack channel, formal feedback forms that I've sent out to users of data import to kind of do a pulse check of how things feel today for folks, what works, what doesn't work, to help us identify where we need to focus our efforts in the future. So for strengths, folks have notified that the app has been stabilizing over recent releases, which is really great to hear. Generally, people find that action profiles work as they expect them to when running their jobs in data import, and it tends to be reliable for more common data ingestion processes. When we get into weaknesses, we find that people tend to agree that documentation is lacking around data import, which is something we'll absolutely be focusing on going forward. Large jobs can still be unreliable. Match profiles could do better to support partial matches or more complex scenarios. Sometimes folks find it hard to know exactly how a complex job will process in the end. You lay out your job profile in a way that makes sense, or you think might make sense, and it might not always turn out the way you expect. And lastly, one of the feedbacks that bubbled to the top was that there's a lack of clear, actionable error messages. Some are better than others, but there's work to be done to make them more useful to users. And in recent enhancements, over the course of Poppy, we introduced data slicing to more reliably process large import jobs. we introduced functionality to create and update multiple holdings and items through data import process. That was in Poppy. In Quiznalia, we refined and documented the current behavior of modify profiles. Sorry, modify jobs. And we also optimized incoming record processing so that the first step of processing where an SRS is created won't happen unless it's truly necessary to help out with stability and processing here. So taking all that feedback, what works, what doesn't work, how people are feeling, I wanted to consider the future of data import, how we can make it hit people's needs, and in coming up with goals for the app, I filtered these ideas through 4 themes to consider in writing out our goals here. First being usability. Is the design and the user experience intuitive? Are features of the app easily understood? Is there documentation? Is it clear and easy to follow, easy to access? Second being functionality. Does data import do what we expect it to do? And does it do it well? To put it bluntly, does it work? And do we need enhancements to support user needs? And we get a bit more into the back end of things, looking at stability and performance. When I think about stability, I want to know, is data import stable in an average environment? Does it crash in certain scenarios that we can identify? Does it work consistently? And for performance, I want to know or question and probe, how quickly can data import jobs process? Is memory usage, well managed? And does it run well with an average tenant setup? So these are kind of the filters I'm working through as I've been considering where we could take data import in the future, what kind of projects to work on to make it so that all 4 of these themes are really working for the users the way they should be. And so this led to what I've presented here on this slide of long-term goals that I want for data import. First being, data import can consistently process large uploads in a single job without failure that can support the higher volume needs of a library. And those large jobs should also be processed at a dependable speed that doesn't lead to unreasonable delays or hindrance to other processes. We also want to make sure that the UI is intuitive. It's easy to use. It supports the user. The average user can, without much effort, be able to create a complex job to do something really out there, or do really simple jobs, just get some new instances in place. Whatever the library needs to do, we want to be able to support it in a way that is easy to follow and intuitive. And in line with that, we want to make sure that there is substantial documentation, both on the wiki and in the docs.folio website, and even considerations for what we could implement within the UI itself to help out users. So those are my big long-term goals. I feel like the lights is kind of dimmed in here. I love the mood. It's nice. Thank you to the electricity or whoever pressed the button. All right. And so with these goals in mind, I'm now going to cover what we have been working on in Ramson's, what's up for consideration in Sunflower, and projects I want to have up for consideration for Trillium, Umbrella Leaf, whatever comes after that. So for Ramsons, which we of course are right in the midst of, there are three major features that the FullLegit team has been working on in relation to data import. Two of them really go hand in hand. These top two here, UXProd 4348 and 3556, are both to offer the ability to export and import job profile details via API. I'm quite excited about this development in that I think it will really help with troubleshooting, to be able to share these details, import, export a job profile. I know sometimes we'll have communications in the Slack channel for data import saying, hey, I tried this job profile and it's failing. Does anyone have any thoughts? And we always have to say, well, can you send me a screenshot of your profile? And then I'm going to go recreate it in my end and all this stuff. I'm hopeful that this implementation here will help us so that we can easily share these details, cut down on time we're spending during troubleshooting process to support each other's needs and identify issues and help each other out. Like I said, these are both via API for Ramsons, but a UI version is up for consideration for a future release, which I would love to see us get in there. And then the third item here for Ramsons is UXProd 4081, which community folks who have taken a part in UATs over the summer within the MMSig and data import subgroup have probably heard me talk about too much at this point, which is standardizing OCLC 035 numbers to remove unnecessary prefixes or leading zeros to make it standardized as these records are being processed through data import. So these are all in flight at this point, near done as part of Ramsons. As I said, the 035 normalization has already gone through UAT a couple times, and I'll be sharing details about the top two features to the community as well, and they'll be included in Ramsons. Now getting into Sunflower, which will be here before we know it, but still everything isn't quite solidified. Things are going through refinement, prioritization, all that fun stuff. But these are the top features that I see bubbling to the top for data import work as part of Sunflower. The first one at the top, UXProd 4944, also touches on aspects of inventory. It's a building off of recent work for the set record for deletion action. And part of this feature will be to enhance how we handle deleted records when they come through data import, to ensure that they are getting all of the same flags that a instance receives when you use the set record for deletion action in inventory. So state is set to deleted, leader set to 05. I'm sorry, leader 05 set to D. Those kinds of details as they're processed through data import. Next is UXProd 4754, which is kind of we've been doing features like this the last couple releases that are kind of general architecture refinement ideas that we work closely with Alameda, our solutions architect, on to try and implement some features to support optimization performance. So it's covers a couple different aspects. Some are tasks, some are spikes as part of this feature. Some aspects that we'll be looking at is events queue process optimization, deduplication of events, and saving journal records in batches rather than one by one to help with performance and speed. Next on my list, UXProd 4080 is reviewing and fixing mark updates for individual fields. So we want to clarify and enhance the update job processing for incoming repeatable mark fields in relation to existing SRS mark bibs. And last but not least is UX Prod 4704 to stop the processing of a job after it's been canceled. So today, what we find is that if you are in the UI and you click cancel, it'll appear as if it's stopped to you, the front end user, but in the back end, it can keep spinning around doing its thing. So not ideal. We want to get that cleaned up and have it actually do what you want it to do when you tell it to stop, which is stop. Um, so those are the four big highlights of what I'm aiming for Sunflower. Of course, I had to put my note at the end that things are subject to change. You know, best laid plans of mice and product owners. Things might change, but I'm hopeful we can get these in here. And these will be going through prioritization and refinement over the next few weeks as Sunflower solidifies. And as things get committed, I will, of course, keep the community up to date with what we have coming down the pipe. Now we get into some of the more nebulous, fun, imaginative, what's our data import utopia future? Trillium, Umbrella Leaf, everything that comes after that. The features on these next two slides for our potential future are greatly inspired by the feedback I've been receiving from the community, my conversations with the dev leads and architects to see how we can make data import hit those long-term goals that I mentioned before. So again, keeping to those themes I mentioned earlier, the slide I'm going over usability and features we have in place to support that. So one thing I mentioned earlier is the idea of, in addition to working on documentation in where we expect it to be, the wiki, docs.folio, we also want to look into adding tooltips in the UI to help users as they're in there working on their work. We also want to look into enhancing data import settings so that you can swap sub profiles rather than have to recreate a job if you want to change the order or change out a particular sub job or sub profile to make it quicker and easier for the end user. We also have a feature that catches a couple different aspects of mapping profile enhancements. Under this, we want to look into doing enhanced field validation and also validation around reference data when these mapping profiles are being set up to dynamically compare to make sure that what's in your, in the case of reference data, what's in your mapping profile is readily available for use. We also want to do a error audit. So as I mentioned earlier, that was one of the weaknesses identified by folks of, sometimes the errors we receive are not helpful or intuitive, and we want to fix that. So we want to do an audit of the existing errors, identify gaps in perhaps situations where there should be an error when there's not, and work out useful language for those errors so that we, when a user encounters such a scenario, it's clear and easy to make the necessary adjustments to get over that hurdle. And of course, documentation was at the top of the weaknesses list. We know we want to do quite a bit of work on this beyond just that feature about tooltips. So there will be multiple different initiatives, not necessarily tied to specific features, to create and enhance and maintain going forward useful documentation for everyone, which some of the stuff available on the wiki, my friends to the side will be touching on momentarily, which is exciting. We'll also be looking at docs.folio enhancement and wherever else we can get this information out and make it usable. And then we get into the other themes that I mentioned before, and some features that could help support those long-term goals. For functionality, we want to look into the ability to view the journey of a data import job as it's processed, to see more granularly for the user what's being done and at what point in the process. We also want to look into supporting additional file types. As linked data comes more into the fold, we want to consider perhaps supporting JSON LD to support ingestion into the linked data module, some cross interaction there, for enhancements to supporting Mark XML, things like that. In stability world, we have a feature here to optimize flows for processing Mark files via data import. In discussions with dev leads and solutions architect, these are some aspects that we think there's room for improvement, room for optimization in that processing that we want to make happen. Similarly, we want to look into the possibility of reducing the memory that's used to store Kafka messages, at least in relation to data import. This one here might be a larger cross-app folio-wide conversation, depending on our options as we look into implementation. But we think there are possibilities to reduce the Kafka messaging, and that could help us with keeping data import more stable. And in performance, we want to refactor storage to better support instance saving. And similarly, we want to support batch processing of records via data import. I know in one of the features on a previous slide for Sunflower, the architecture refinement feature, we're looking at doing this for journal records. And this feature will be looking into doing this for all record types. So today, as records are processed, they go one by one. And we believe that by batching them out, we'll be able to give the users better performance. And so, these are ideas that have come through just recently, or features here that have come through just recently from, like I said, conversations with developers, conversations with SMEs. And I'm sure there is additional features that we could bring up for consideration in the backlog that pre-existing that we can work into the fold along with these things. But I think that getting these projects or similar projects prioritized will really help us to hit those data import long-term goals over the next few releases. So with that, I just want to touch on next steps. So my plan is to publish, condense and publish the details from this slide onto the EDS wiki. What I want to have is a page on the wiki representing the data import roadmap that will become a living document of sorts. We can keep it up to date as we go from release to release, as things get refined, prioritized, deprioritized. I want it to be a place where you can see the direction of where we're going at a high level. So I'll be working on a page like that, which I will send out, to everyone through Slack and the usual channels once that page is published. And I hope it will meet our needs, and I look forward to having such a page like this available for folks to easily reference to say, where are we going, with data import. In the same breath, like I said, we are trying to get Sunflower solidified right now. We'll be finalizing that. I want to run some prioritization exercises with SMEs to really get those features in line for Sunflower, so we are able to commit to a plan soon. And once we come up with that plan, that will as well be shared out with the larger group, and that the decisions for Sunflower will be worked into the roadmap page on the wiki that I will be publishing. So look out for those details. And with that, I think that's the end of my deck here. So put my contact info here. Find me on Slack if you have questions, complaints, concerns, or just want to chat. I'm available. And I would love to hear feedback from folks on what I just displayed. If you think it sounds good, if you have other features you think would help support the goals I've laid out, if there's any aspects from the feedback that you think you have that didn't get collected. I want to hear. Feedback is so important to making this work better. So yeah, with that, how are we doing on time? I think we're looking pretty good. We can take maybe pause, see if anyone has any questions right now before we move on to the next portion of our session. So any questions right now? Yeah. Gotta get run the mic.
If this is too institution specific, let me know. I have a very specific match, but you brought up OCLC numbers and normalizing. And our goal all along of something we wanted to do is be able to match an incoming OCLC record with the subfield A and Z, and with what's existing in folio, that entire field. Is that something that's possible now? And maybe this is something for the next part of the session. Does that, and hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, unless you were planning on touching on anything like that, doesn't sound like it. I do know that we have some tickets in the backlog to take a closer look into matching on 035 subfield A. I would have to double check my notes. I do believe we have that wrapped into a potential feature, so I can get back to you on that. But yes, generally. Any other questions? All right. Nothing on Zoom? All right, cool. Well, thanks so much, everyone. I will turn it over to Jennifer to kick off the next portion.
Part two.
Part
It's
two.
coming.
That's right.
Next one. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Eustace, and I'm joined here with Christy Thomas and Yao Hod, Stanford, Chicago, 5 colleges. So I guess we represent the United States. Thank you. Here we are. So we are here really to share our experience with data import. We did send a survey out to get feedback on what people's questions were, their pain points, and what they wanted to learn from this session. And we try to incorporate it into this. And there you go. So what we're going to be covering today. So information about the lab sessions. Yay. So there is the working group, but there's also lab sessions. Sometimes we record, and I realize it's Thursdays from 3 to 4, but anyway, we'll go over that. Also resources and help, where to find what. For this session, we did actually do a lot of cleanup of the wiki pages under information and user guides. So we're really proud of that. Topics, how we prepare files for data import, matching, mark modifications, job profiles, and ETL. So if you have a question that you are, even if you're not burning to really know the answer at that moment, just stop us and ask us, because we really want this session to be interactive. This session is for you to learn more about data import. I mean, not that we're experts, we just kind of use it to the best of our ability, but we really want to make sure that we're answering questions, or at least directing you to someone who knows how to answer your questions. All right, the lab session. As I said, the lab session is on Thursdays from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern time. I realize that might not be a time that everyone can go to. If you want to go and you can't go at that time, just Slack us. What do we do? So basically people come with an issue, a question, or something that they want to work through, and we work through it together. So we have a page for it that has the Zoom link, also information on who to contact, and of course the, what else? Thank you, Slack channel. Yeah. Any questions about that? We do have fun in lab. All right. Resources and help. So of course, the working group has its page, which it used to be called Batch Loader Group. This has the Zoom link, all of that. If you're already familiar with data import, you've probably seen this on the wiki. But this is where you can get information in terms of the agenda notes, when the primary working group meets, and of course, you know how to contact Ryan, since he's the PO, and all of that. And there's also an archive on there with many, many things. This is the page for the lab sessions, which has all the information there for you. So there you go, just showing that off. We have an import tracker. This is based off of the acquisition SIG. What the import tracker does is say which issues are currently open, in draft, or on review. And then at the bottom of the page, we have this giant table with lots and lots of features that we want added. So even if you can't attend the lab session or the working group, but you want something for data import, just add it here. Anyone who has a Confluence username and password can edit this page. If you don't know how to do that, just Slack the data import working group or the lab session Slack channel, and we can put it on for you. What happens is we take these features, we bring it to the working group where we discuss and refine. And normally Ryan makes a Jira issue. Thank you, because I don't like Jira. I'm always like, what do I do? There's too many options. Yeah, it's not the buffet I like. Anyway, but please use this as a resource. And we really want to hear what features you want from this app so you can put them there. So on the wiki, I have to say the docs folio, mostly the information that's there is like, what is an action? Yay, but it doesn't really help you prepare and run and use the tool. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. Really, it's the information and user guide for data import that will help you hopefully do this. So this was reworked. It explains the landing page. And let me just expand this a bit. The landing page, settings area, permission, tips and FAQ, release notes and functionality, reliability and performance. So for example, on the settings page, these are the field mappings, which have useful information on how to remove data from a field. You know, edifact files, if you're wondering what is an edifact file, this has a link to the standard. So these pages are really rich with a lot of information. So I highly recommend that you go visit those if you're learning about the tool, or if you forget, like, what does it mean to remove data from a field? Oh, and that's the mark one. Because data import is developing at a fast pace, there are a lot of scripts that tend to be run before each upgrade. So I really recommend that people look at the scripts for inventory, source record storage, and cleanup before every upgrade. If not you, maybe your systems librarian or hosting provider, whoever does that for you. Because some of these are really important for data import, just cleaning up kind of data that gets in the way of data import. So any questions about those pages? No, you're all smart. You know this already, right? Just kidding. So preparing files for import. And I'm going to toss it to Christy.
So when we started thinking about what to prepare based on the survey results, we thought that it would be interesting for to take some of the categories that were presented as needing explanation or things that people had questions about, and talk a little bit about those from the perspective of each of our institutions. I'm actually not going to go through everything on this slide. So the first category is, well, what do we do to prepare? Okay, there's a question.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to?
Oh.
Oh.
That's weird. Oh, it's weird because on Zoom it's not.
Yeah. It's not.
Thank
Yeah, but
you.
now on Zoom it is. Right?
PCs kind of scare me, so I'm glad that there are PC experts up here who could change that for me. Since I'm going first to talk about preparing our preparing our files for data import, because we're going to talk a little bit about mark modifications later, but the limitations of mark modifications historically in data import meant that we have just stabilized our workflows by heavily using mark edit and other pre-processing techniques. We basically do all of our data transformations right now outside of data import, and we're really just replacing records when we update things in data import or creating records. Here's a list of a lot of things that we do. I also wanted to talk a little bit about how we use these transformations, not just for enriching our data or enhancing it or doing our data transformations in MarcEdit, but also for adding a lot of data that we can map to help us manage our collections, such as the 957 subfield A, we're putting the collection ID in so that that can be mapped. And that is helping us manage our electronic resources. And it's very important. We're also adding a unique identifier in the 035 with a second indicator of 9 that is completely unique to that resource for that collection, because matching is not where it needs to be right now with data import. That 035 with the second indicator of 9 is something that we build in every single record that we load, no matter what type of record it is. And that's pretty much our match point if it's not the instance HRID. For the record. But I think that you'll find that we're all doing a lot of our pre-processing in MarcEdit. And with that, here I just have a pre-processed file. I knew we weren't doing a live demo, I'm actually not going to talk about this, but I put it here in case I needed to show anything. But it's in the slides if anybody wants to look at what a processed record looks like from Chicago.
I actually don't have a lot to add to that because, like Christy said, because of the way data import was set up, we are also doing all of our updating all of our processing in MarcEdit. Again, we also add, fields that we need for special identification. We add collection names. We do it slightly differently than Chicago does, but basically it's the same idea. We get our records, we modify them in MarcEdit, and then we load them. So again, we either create new records or we are updating on the records that we have different ways of matching. We are still struggling with the matching for updating existing files. We've pretty much figured out how to do it on anything that we've loaded new into. Once we migrated to Folio, we're still struggling with the updating of the stuff from our previous system. So we're figuring things out as we go along, and we've, and again, the whole thing with the partial matches I think that doesn't work quite well as expected, is a big issue, but a lot of the same things, and like you can see some of the same fields are in the same or similar idea of using MarcEdit to update. So now how do I go to the next? Okay.
Yep. So you see, I guess we're all doing similar stuff. We use the container code. It's just the 035 first indicator 9, not the second indicator 9.
Just to confuse it.
Yeah. We've used this field in the 5 colleges for actually a very long time. Because we batch load both at the consortia level and for each one of our institutions. So we prefix our codes with the school prefix, like UM for UMass, FC for 5 colleges, AC for Amherst. And the 5 colleges, by the way, are Amherst College, Hampshire College, Mount Holyoke College, Smith College. We're very college oriented until you get to the big elephant in the room, UMass Amherst, which is a tower of a library. It's 26 floors. Anyway, so we also use this container code for other forms of material like our ETDs. So in parentheses, we have like UM ETDs, and this allows us to actually grab everything that we want as a set. It is mapped to the instance system control number. So for example, if I have, let's say Berg, I have UM BRG, and then I can put, in parentheses star in inventory. That will bring everything up that has that container code. So then I can export it. I can do whatever I want with those records, which is really convenient and why we chose to use the container code. Sometimes we have a collection statement. This is more for our discovery so that people can say, we use EBSCO, so it's EDS. I think it's AR, and then they use this phrase. It's like additional author or something like that. And that brings up everything, which is really convenient, not only for our liaisons, but also our patrons. We want to make sure that everything has like the RDA. I mean, even though they might not be full RDA records, some records are pretty bad, unfortunately. And we also want to make sure that everything is valid against the content as well as the structure of the MARC file. So we use heavily MarcEdit tasks for this. For Edifact files, honestly, Edifact files, in the 2 years I've been loading them, I only had one file that was invalid. And I don't know, Edifact files are really smooth. Woohoo! Because I hate reading those things. I do use Visual Code Studio, which has an extension for Edifact, and it just makes it really, really easy to parse, because there's tons of like apostrophes and, RFL : apostrophe. It's like, what's going on? I don't understand, but Visual Code helps with that. And that's what we do. Oh,
Can I
yeah.
say one more thing?
Yeah.
You don't have to go back.
Okay,
You don't have to
good.
go back. You can. I actually just wanted to say, I meant to say this because I know that data loading for orders is very new in Folio. And at Chicago, we started with our Poppy release. We're still on Poppy. We actually started using the MARC, the data import for batch loading orders from MARC records. And it is very important to make, there's a lot of cleanup that needs to happen to make that work. For instance, and the things that we do to mark orders are on the Chicago slide. But one of the things that is really important is like normalizing ISBNs. Order records require a valid ISBN. So we use MarcEdit and tasks to validate ISBNs, and that includes making sure that there's no extraneous data in the ISBN field. So we get a lot of order records that will have punctuation, like a semicolon, colon, or they'll have the qualifying information in the subfield A rather than a subfield Q. So we do a lot of pre-processing to get rid of invalid ISBNs and put them in a subfield C. We remove all punctuation from the subfield A, and we put all of the qualifying information in the subfield Q. If you are using the MARC record to create an order, if you have not done this, the order will not create and will be rejected by data import. Just a tip. Okay, and I'm talking about matching again. So, you know, matching is a challenge, but actually you can see we're doing, when I put this together, I realized that we're doing a lot more matching than I expected, or that I had the perception that we were doing at Chicago. But so this first slide has our instance matches. You can see that the things that we are really matching on are the 035 with a second indicator of 9. The OCLC number and the 035 subfield A was a big match point in our previous system. We're not using that at all. We're only using the 035 with a second indicator of 9 because it is a completely unique match point that we have decided locally to use, and we've identified and we've put in our system. We do have a little over 3 million electronic resource records in our system, and we have staff working on a project, an export transform load project, going in and trying to get those identifiers into our records. It is going to be a years-long project, but we needed to be there to be able to manage our electronic resources going forward, because that is the match point that we use. Otherwise, we just use the instance HRID in the 001 or the instance UUID in the 999FF subfield I. If these are not in the records, we use LDP or MetaDB to do a query, get that identifier, and then we run a process to merge it into the record so we can load them. For holdings and item matches, we do, oh, there's actually one that's not on here. Oh, no, it's on the next. How do I go back? Thank you. Okay, so for holdings and items matches, and this is not for acquisitions loading, we actually use known item identifiers. We put them in 991 fields. So we're matching the holdings or the item record on the HRID or the UUID. The only way that we get these is from LDP and MetaDB searches. And we bring those into the records that way. We do frequently use the holdings type as a submatch if we want to update like the instance and the holdings. So we will match on the instance ID, the ID and the instance that we want to match on, and then we'll match on, say, you know, the holdings that is attached to that instance with this type. But these are the only identifiers, only match points that we use in any of our profiles. And then for acquisitions loading, like I said, we load orders. There's no match point for that, but there is a match point that is required when we load the full cataloging that comes in at a later date for those order records. And these are the match points that we're using for that. We're using the vendor reference number, which for us is in the 980 subfield C. And you can see that it matches the ACK data vendor reference number from that acquisitions block at the bottom of the instance in the holdings record. So that's what we're using to match the instance record and the holdings record. And then for item, we're matching the item that is attached to the holdings and instance with that vendor reference number and has a status of on order. So those are the match points that we have found work for us, and they're working really consistently, and they're really very stable for us at Chicago. Yes. And I think that there's a question over here as well.
Okay, so this is not only for Chicago, but maybe everyone here. So I'm wondering about the non-Latin script records, because I know that MarcEdit can't validate if the fields are linked or not. So how do you handle this if you already received the records that have fields are not linked together? Non-Latin script fields are not linked. Because if they are not linked, then will not be displayed in the instance.
You're talking about when there's like an 880, but no corresponding Romanized field for that?
No, they are not linked. I mean, there is something wrong with subfield 6.
Oh, yeah. No, that is actually something that we know about. And you know, it's just not the top. Chicago is not our, you know, we've got bigger things to worry about right now. But that is something that we would have to find. Validation in MarcEdit will not find that, and that is not something that Folio, it doesn't cause any display issues in Folio other than the mapping, right? The instance mapping is not going to map it to the instance because the subfield 6 is not right, so it's not picking that up.
Yes.
So you would probably need to use, like, I know you have MetaDB. I would use MetaDB to run a query to find like 880s with a subfield 6, or, you know, mark fields with a subfield 6 where the linking is not working. My mind's already thinking about the query that you could do to find something like that, but we don't have that query.
Yeah, because sometimes the vendor records are not matched, they do mistakes, of course, and sometimes I find records are not matched, but Folio doesn't say anything.
No, yeah. I mean, that's just that's a mark error, and yeah, we would just probably run a report and find those and clean those up. Hopefully it's a small enough number we could do it manually.
No, no tips. Well, I mean, like, I think, you know, what we do is we try to catch everything before we load them. And then, you know, obviously because we're looking at, we are looking at the records. So even if we're running tasks, I mean, I know I look at the records. I don't just run the task and then load them without checking them. And if it's something that, I mean, obviously in language that I can't, you know, fix by myself, or I can't even tell if it's, we'll send it to the, you know, the language specialist in our cataloging team, and then hopefully they'll find it and fix it, and then hopefully we can fix it in MarcEdit before loading. And then, for, as Christy said, for the stuff that's already been loaded, yeah, we probably have to run a query in MetaDB and find them and hopefully fix them.
I would be interested in knowing what type of pre-import review you're doing to find those types of errors.
Visual.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions while I'm up?
Oh, Kalila has a question. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'll go here and then I'll come back to you. I'll get my steps in.
Apologies to Kalila first. Sorry about that. The thing that I noticed was there's a lot of specialized fields and a lot of identifier manipulation. And I was wondering if you could comment on how that affects ongoing processes, because the first thing that went through my head is you have overlays coming through multiple different processes, I would assume, which I was wondering if you could comment on how that affects record maintenance, workflows, that kind of stuff.
No, absolutely. And that is actually why we have we've doubled the amount of documentation that we have. And we really have had to consider that in all of our workflows. So everybody that's doing electronic resources needs to know what our current processes are. We also, I'm going to talk about this in a future slide. We do a lot of pre-import and post-import reports, just so we can, enhance the logs. We know what these records should match, if anything, and which records they should update. And we can figure out whether or not we need to do pre-import manipulation to make sure that it works. And we can identify some of that in those ways. But because a lot of our historical data is imported without these new sort of identifier policies and practices that we've put into place, those pre-import reports help us to know what type of pre-import data cleanup we need to do. And that is really slowing down our loading right now. I don't know if anybody else has anything to say about, the impact of identifier management on your workflows in general.
I think just in general, data import has increased like the amount of time that we spend on batch loading in general. So I think it's in some cases like 3 to 4 times as much time as I spent with my previous system. I didn't have to do as much validation. I could get the log errors. I mean, the system we had was very mature also. So, I mean, it had, mature features that I think Folio is still developing. But, we've had to do our own documentation. We're also a consortium. So our documentation has to be at the consortial level as well as our institution level, which adds a layer. And I think kind of understanding like some of what goes into an import in terms of the actions and modifications, some understand better than others. So it's hard to troubleshoot. So yeah, things just take longer.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. Things take longer and there are more people doing things that less people were doing before, just to get everything loaded. We had a lot of processes that were fully automated before in our previous system that we're now doing manually. We are working on automating some of them, but it's taking time. So I'll go back to Kalila.
Thanks everyone for what's been presented so far. Christy, regarding the two rows, the first 2 rows, what's the scenario when you use those match points, when you need to use the local identifier versus the 001 or the 99FF?
So, no, that's actually a great question. So we do this for a lot of our ongoing electronic resource loads, which is really the bulk of our data loading. It far outstrips the amount of data loading we do for any of our other workflows. So let's say that we get, for like our Hein Online, just to pick a database where we get quarterly files and we get new records and we get update records and we get merged records and deleted records. But we also get Hein records in multiple workflows. So we need to know we want to match the Hein record that belongs to this workflow. So we've created an 0359 that is for our, let's say, our Cassidy Hein records. Is going to have a completely unique, I should have put a screenshot in here. So it'll have a completely unique prefix for us, which will be like, Cassidy Hein Online in parentheses, and then sort of like the Cassidy number. from that vendor load, and we put that in the 0359. So the next time we get an update, we're only going to match on that 0359. So even if that same Hein record is a part of another package and is in the system, it's going to have a different 0359 because it'll have a different prefix, and a different number because it's coming through a different workflow, and it's not going to match that. Some of our problems are with matching. Some of the things that this solves is like the inability to have partial matches or complex matches. They're just not working in data import right now. We could have, we have the collection name is somewhere in the record. So if we could say match on the 035A and the collection name in this other field, we could do that, but that's not really working right now. So this kind of, and we actually, I want to give Jennifer Eustace like total props for this because we absolutely followed her lead on doing this. And it actually has created a very stable environment for us. And we're very pleased with this approach. It's solved a lot of problems for us, and we'll probably we've made a long-term commitment to this approach, even once like more complex matching is possible in data import, because it's very clean and precise. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, basically, it's similar. I think what I'd want to add is that we really rely on exact matches. We don't do partials, starts with, we do have some that have like a submatch on a location, but really it's a direct match to an identifier, an HRID or UUID. And I think that's worked for us, so we just stick to it. I will say that, at the instance level, always remember that the MARC SRS bib record and the instance record are tied at the hip. They're kind of like, I don't know, sort of twins that were not born at the same time. They're not identical, but they sort of love each other, but hate each other at the same time. They go hand in hand. You update one, the other is updated. So some people forget that. So, but if you want to do an update to a bib, like an SRS bib record, you do have to match to that record type. So, and I forgot to mention it in these slides, but so if you're acting on a record type, make sure that your match is matching to that same record type. Oh, and there we go. We go on. Yes, we do barcodes. It's the same as Chicago, really. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I forgot the I-999s, but basically we're doing the same stuff. We do not do a container code, but we do, we have a vendor code which we add on all our records. Or it's actually even per package on the package level. So we take the vendor ID and we add another code to it so that then again we can match on that going forward. So and then we take whatever is in the 001 in the record that comes in, we add that on to it, and then it becomes an 035, and then we can match on the 035A. Which I guess works the same way as the 0359, just doing it in a different way. And again, this is done in MARC edit when we get the records before we load them. Or obviously if we don't have that for some reason, we're always like, or we can't match on something, we are running through MetaDB, pulling out the UUID and matching on that. Again, using only exact matches. We've tried several different partials, which don't work. Neither the start with, the end with, the contains. So we're hoping for that to be in the future of data import, but really similar things. And I didn't do a slide for this, but again, with the acquisitions data for the orders, we're doing that as well. I don't personally do it. So I did sit with our acquisitions librarian before coming to make sure I understood. I think I understand, but basically the same thing, getting the information out of the 980 that comes in the records, and that creates the orders. And then we also get the records that are overlaid onto our existing records get the full record. So, the same idea. I think we're pretty much all doing the same thing, maybe using a different way to get that unique ID, but we're all adding that because it's really the only way to match things. Okay.
Yes.
Mark modifications. I think that's all you, Jennifer.
Everyone's excited now. See, people left. They don't know what they're missing. It is mark modification time. Woo. All right. Mark modifications. It is an action, which means it's linked to a field mapping profile. So you can't have one without the other. They're like Lego blocks that aren't sold separately. Anyway, so the changes, so a mark modification is basically an action that's taken on an incoming mark file. So in this, I think it's only bibliographic incoming records that have mark modifications. So if you have mark holdings or mark authorities, I'm sorry. Anyway, we only do bib records here. That's not true. So when do you use a mark modification? So you want to remove some unwanted fields from the incoming record. I think a good example is getting stuff from OCLC, like the 029 with vendor stuff, and maybe you don't want their EAST commitment notes. EAST is the Eastern Academic Scholarly Trust shared print something program. You don't want that school's statement. You want to get rid of it. So you use a mark modification to actually just remove those fields in the incoming file, and then yay, you don't have to do that manually. You want to update the mark SRS bib record and inventory records, and the incoming mark file needs to change that. So one of our common jobs is, of course, loading e-resources. We have fields in 876, 877, 856. We don't need those in our bib records after we load the instance holdings and items. So we just want to dump those records after we're finished it. So we have a clean SRS and instance record. So when not to use them, you want to override some field protection. So let's say for some reason there's a note, maybe a 590 in your bib records, and I forgot something, and it's not the phrase that they should have been using. This happens all the time. Your data is inconsistent, right? So you won't use mark modifications for that because it's an existing record in Folio. So you really do need what is called an update action, and then of course to override any field protections. You also don't want to use mark modifications to update holdings or item records. So in this case, you match to the holdings or you match to an item record. That record, so the incoming record is just kind of a vehicle for the data to be transferred to the either creating those records or updating the existing records. So the mark modification doesn't update at the end, so you don't want to update your instance. You're just dealing with holdings and items at that point. Any questions about that? Awesome. And there's a mark modification in the middle because that's your transfer. Yeah. So there is new logic for mark modifications. And if you have used mark modifications, you're kind of like, how does this work? It doesn't seem consistent. And granted, it sort of hasn't. There's been some gotchas in there, which are very exciting. Well, I guess until you're not excited and you have to figure it out. But with Quiznalia, there is a new logic. And this is basically mark modification actions cannot be placed immediately after a match or no match or after an update. Mark modifications can be placed at the very beginning of a job or at the very end or after a create action. And notice I did some testing for this. I didn't test for like placing tons of mark modifications everywhere. So maybe that's the next like enhancement step. You know, I'm not sure what that would look like. This is documented on our kind of wiki page under enhancements for Quiznalia. Any questions about that? All right. So how do we use this in the 5 colleges? So on the, I guess it's on this side towards me, when we load our e-resources, I have actually, well, a match that says, you know, if this has already been loaded, you found a match, then I don't want to create the records. I kind of just dump it. Well, there's no action. I shouldn't say dump it. There is a no action because nothing happens. But then if it doesn't find a match, then it creates all of the records. The Mark SRS bib, instant holdings. For e-resources in the 5 colleges, we do items as well. So it does create items. And then because my incoming Mark had all of those fields with data to create the items, such as the barcode and the holdings and all of that, I want to dump all those fields because I don't need that in my bib record. So that's the last action here, which is a Mark modification as well as an update. So when it appears last like this, you are updating the instance and Mark SRS. Whereas if it's in the very beginning, you are not updating. So important to stick in. You're just manipulating the incoming file. We also are testing it with single record import and update. And you can see that they're actually, because they're in the front, because we want to get rid of unwanted fields from OCLC. And so far, this is working really well. We tried it in Poppy, it didn't work, but yay, go Quiznalia, it is working. So that's how we use Mark modifications.
So at Chicago, we're very excited for all of the new Mark modifications logic. We are actually only using Mark modifications in one way, but I think it's a pretty common use case. So you can see this is actually working now in Poppy. You can see that we have a create job, and then we have the last action to be delete 990. One of the things that we do for all of our e-resources is we add a statistical code for our discovery layer to be able to filter on subtypes. Like, is it streaming video? Is it streaming audio? Is it an electronic map? And it's not always easy to tell those things from the bibliographic data. So before we load, we use our Mark Edit task to add a 990 subfield A with a statistical code for that type of electronic resource. And then we use it to map the statistical code into the holdings record at the point of creation. And then this Mark modification comes along at the end and it actually deletes that code because we don't want that 990A to stay in the records after it's served its purpose, which is to map data to the holdings record. And you can see this is the single line of that Mark modification is delete the 990. And I should say that this works in Poppy and older versions of Folio, but only for creates. It does not work on updates. It's okay if this is at the end of a job that also has an update in it, just nothing will happen to the updated files. It'll delete it from the creates files, but not the updated records. And this is really all we're doing so far. So we're excited to start testing more complex Mark modifications in Quiznalia.
I'm not going to stand up because we're not doing Mark modifications. we're testing them in the single record import, but like we haven't started yet. So I will get up because I'm next.
And I just advanced way too much. So
It's okay. So job profiles. So how do I go forward? Okay. So that's actually created this slide after your slide, but I guess when you change the order of things. But so we are not a consortium, but we are lots of different. We have like 5 different schools that work in the same system. But so we have about, I think I wrote it afterwards, I think 100 active job profiles that are being used. But we make sure to differentiate like who's using what. So as you can see, like we have, the law school has their profiles, business school, and then even like our music library, because they have very unique records. So they have their own job profiles. SUL is Stanford University Libraries. That's the main library. And then again, because our acquisition unit is also using data import for importing things. So it's SUL AC would be the acquisitions profiles. And then ERC is the electronic resource control. So different, so just so that we have, it's very clear. And then we try to give very clear names. What does this profile do? Create or update, create holdings and SRS mark holdings are, very, very specific things for different jobs. But again, we try to keep it simple. I mean, the one that I use all the time is our create and update. So when I get vendor records, a batch, I will obviously first run them through Mark Edit, add all our things, fix them up, do what needs to be done, and then I manually load them to data import. Well, I don't, because I'll get to this after. We have another app that we've added onto it, which our vendor management app, which we run things through. But it does a lot of the stuff first, but it then creates and updates as needed. If it was created if it's a record that was already created, that was created only in Folio, that it will obviously update because it can match on the 001 that is already there. But we just, and then obviously creates anything that is new, that if it doesn't find it's create, if there's no match, create, if there is a match, update. We don't use slicing, which I think Ryan mentioned that is new was new in Poppy, right? Yeah, because that's what we're on is Poppy. Because we have our vendor management app, what it does is it already slices for us. It does loads of 500 records at a time. So anything bigger than that, it will do it in several jobs. It also, if you're doing something very big, then if other people are loading, like single records will come in between. This, which is works sort of like data slicing, the way it's set up in data import. And yeah, so like I said, we have a lot of profiles that are very specific for jobs, and also general ones that are used over and over again for, daily, everyday use. Oop. Okay, yeah. So the vendor management app is a tool that was developed by our systems. It fetches records from vendors. And then for some things, it directly loads them, like the acquisitions stuff, it does directly. For us in metadata, we're using it to actually fetch the records, like our OCLC records, which was what in our previous system was a fully automatic process. Now we have it fetch them, then we manually run them through our Mark Edit tasks, and then we put them back into the vendor management app for loading. What's really great about that is we have all of our files in one place of everything that's been loaded. Instead of, if I load something and then it's like the original file was kept on, maybe on my personal laptop or something, but now it's all the files are saved in the vendor management app. And like I said, it chunks everything up into loads of 500, which makes things more manageable. And then if also there's an error that might be only in a smaller part, if there was, one, a few records that didn't work, it won't stop the whole job. UMass.
So we tend to keep our job profiles relatively simple. We don't use mark orders. We use edifact files. So we have, again, we use the school prefix to distinguish in between job profiles for each school and those for the consortium. However, we've built, so 5C we like to call it BLTers. Yes. Anyway, we map everything. So we can map the item status. We map, for example, in the holdings, the relationship type. And this is just to provide a lot of flexibility in terms of what we can kind of use the profiles for, which has turned out to be really good. So for the Edifact files, each school does have to have its own, I mean, because it's linked to, finance and invoices. So some schools have many, other, like UMass only has two. Amherst College, I think, has like 10 or so. I don't know. They like their invoices. But because we do share these kind of consortium map all job profiles, we currently have only 76 job profiles in total, which is really nice. So, it's not a long list. We can sort through it. When we create job profiles, we normally do it as a group. We have a working group at the consortial level, working on data import, data export, bulk edit, and ListMap. And so we kind of work on it together. We also have a lab that we do in case, people don't understand like why we're inserting actions that we do. And then we move it to, we test it and then move it to production. We do use slicing. So we like slicing so far. Before this, we kind of topped out at like 5,000, 6,000 records, and data import slowly went into a death spiral, and we were like, okay, that's cool. So I would slice up files, 800, and there's one EBO. We're still loading EBO. Once we got to, I think, was the one before Poppy? Anyway, who knows? We were able to reach 3,000. So I basically have 50 files of 3,000, and this was before we could do multiple holdings and items. So I have 3,000 of the file 5 times, one so I could add holdings for all 5 schools. It's very intense. So I'm very happy now that we have multiple holdings and items. Now that they've been split into 3,000, I kind of kept that, but at least now I have one file. What's also nice about slicing is in the log in the top right corner, you can download the file. Since we're a consortium, we do have different storage areas. Like I can't access Amherst College's storage, drive. That I'm not an employee of Amherst. However, I can get it from data import. And this has been really great for troubleshooting, helping people out, and understanding kind of what's going on, and being, I think, more of a consortium in how we do that. It does chunk at 1,000 records. And so far, our limits are fairly low. We're kind of around 20 to 30,000. We're not sure why. We know other schools can do much more. So updates take longer than creates for us. Updating the SRS bib takes even longer because it's like a dual. You have to update the SRS and the instance and the mapping kind of. So it does slow things down a lot. But that is it.
So we are a little bit different. We're the same but different, as with other aspects of data import. So I just sort of listed out some of our practices to give you a glimpse into our process. So we do use the MARC orders loading native to Folio. We load invoices from EDI. I don't really talk much about that because I'm not the person who's responsible for that aspect of things at my institution. But I can point you to my colleague who's actually here in the room if you have any questions about that. And we create and update inventory records for a variety of workflows. We also do not have slicing turned on locally for a number of reasons. If we have to load something that is more than that is updating instances and is more than like 20,000 records, we'll just manually break things apart. We are able to, in our environment, import files of between 20 and 30,000 records in our production environment without any issues, except for with the logs. We're not actually able to read the logs for them. We do a couple bullet points down. I mentioned this. We have, and I mentioned this before, we have pre-import and post-import queries that we run that resolve that problem for us because we're querying MetaDP and LDP to get that information out. And that's actually one reason we didn't turn on slicing, because slicing, if we loaded a file of say 20,000 records, it would chunk it into batches of 1,000, and there would be 1,000 logs, and we wouldn't actually be able to use our query tools that we've been using. And that was really important for us to be able to continue to use that. And we do have we are working on a tool that will help us load larger files and do that splitting of files and reconstituting the log data back into a single log for us, or at least that's the idea. But we don't have that right now. Another thing that is helpful for us, we're very lucky to have a complete replica of production that we use as a staging environment. So we actually load all of our data import files into that staging environment first so that we can fix problems before we get them into production. It actually doesn't add that much time. And if you get junk data, you can't delete it right now. So we've just found that is a practice that we think is 100% worth it at our institution. For electronic resource loading, I mentioned this earlier, we only match on the 0359. And we actually have one sort of workhorse type of profile that we use for electronic resources loading. And since we have this exact match that we expect, we can have this profile that updates if a match and then creates if no match. And we use this for like 90% of our electronic resources data loading. I actually have a screenshot of that job profile on a subsequent slide. The only other, I think, sort of practice that we have is that for acquisitions, there are a couple of approaches that you can have to updates. If you're like updating an instance of holdings in an item, you can match the instance and then update it, and then match the holdings and then update it, and then match the item and update it. In which case, if the item doesn't match, you've already updated the instance and the holdings. But we have taken the approach where we require all three to match before we update any of the records. I mentioned that because that's actually a conversation that we frequently have when we're creating new profiles that are going to update instances, holdings, and items, because we've found some records that got into some funny states when we updated the instance and then the holdings didn't match, but we shouldn't have actually updated that instance. So like I said, I included some screenshots, for your reference later. You can download the slides. But this is our electronic resources data loading job profile that we use for the majority of our loads. So you can see that the match point is the 035. The 035 with a second indicator of 9. And then the holdings type is electronic. And if it matches both of those things, then it updates the SRS record and it updates the holdings. And if it doesn't match, then we create new. And then we have our mark modification down there at the bottom. And for something like this, if it was a mixed file and some of the records were updates and some of them were creates, the creates would have the 990 deleted and the updates would not. But it doesn't seem to cause any harm, so we're living with that for now. Here's our profile for our job level profile for creating mark orders from mark records. It's very simple and straightforward. And then here is a profile at Chicago for matching an order, an instance of holdings and or an item that was created as a part of the order process, and loading the full cataloging and updating that at the point of shipping and invoicing of the piece.
All right. So ETL, which was the ETL for you?
Export.
Yeah, thank you. Export, I just call it round tripping. especially before bulk edit, we used data export and data import in tandem to clean up records, especially after our migration, and even since then, we routinely clean up our records. Our export profiles those jobs are built with the intent to use the match points that we've set up in data import. So for example, the 901A has the holdings HRID. We also include the holdings UUID in the 901B. The item HRID is in the 902 A, and the barcode is in the 876. The 876 is also the field that we use to store barcodes when we create items. So we also tried to use everything that we're using to create or update, as well as export, just so it's easier to remember, and it's easier to document as well. We also have an export for all fields of the MARC SRS holdings and items. This does not work well for serials. Sometimes you'll get an error. It just exceeds, especially with the items, serial records with tons and tons of volumes. You will get a message that the MARC record has exceeded its limit. That's a known fact. So because there are fields, for example, electronic resource or notes that are the same at the instance holdings and items level, we distinguish those using the first indicator H for holdings and I for items. I know this is not valid MARC. Yeah. So, and we have that in our documentation. However, it lets people, I think, understand where the data is coming from. And that's been successful for us. Though sometimes I'm like, I validate and I'm like, oh, I forgot to remove those again. So it does with call number, notes, the 856 or electronic access field. So we do share data export profiles. And of course, each institution also has some of their own. We always test in our test environment because you can delete them, but you can't modify the data export job profiles. So once you have it, there you go. Hopefully it's working. Sorry. So yeah, we always want to test it to make sure we have the mapping we need. And then if we don't, then we duplicate it and add more stuff. For very large updates, in particular items, when there are multiple items or even multiple holdings, we actually don't want to use data import in the 5 colleges or even UMass. We prefer actually the API. It goes much faster, and it can handle the multiples, I think, much better than data import. And for that, we go to or bulk edit. Actually, bulk edit is a lifesaver. It's my favorite new tool. I've started using that for changes at the item and holdings level, and I can't wait for it to have more fields that I can bulk edit. Because really data import, I think the power, even in our old system, the power of importing was really the creation of records or manipulating kind of the bibliographic record. Here in Folio, it's the SRS or that instance. And I think with holdings and items, I mean, in our old system, it was global services or global updates, whatever. Bulk edit is the tool to use.
Yeah, so we don't have any like preset data export files, except for the ones that come default in data export. We use a lot of query searches, and what we'll do often is use MetaDB to find the file, an identifier that we can use, and then query them and then create a file that way in data export. And then again, do the transformation, whatever we need to do outside of Folio, and then reload then we reload again into data using data import, obviously. But like Jennifer said, yeah, bulk edit has been a lifesaver. We've been, like moving things like temporary locations and like things like that. It's all, we're all about data, all about bulk edit, and really looking forward to having more features. But I like some of your ideas, so I might be stealing some of those for maybe creating some data export profiles going forward. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Questions?
I just wanted to thank the data import group. You guys have hung in there for years. I couldn't take it. So I know what I'm just really grateful to the work you've done and what you're showing here today. So I just want to acknowledge that. Thank you so much.
I'm going to actually add on to that before we get to the question, because at Stanford, we've only been live for just over a year now. So I've learned so much from coming to the data import groups, and this lab session is a lifesaver. And just, coming with like, I've tried to do this and I can't get it to work, or watching somebody else who had the same issue. And I'm like, oh, it's not just me. And just being able to, like, I've gotten so much good advice especially from these two, but from the whole group who've just been doing this longer than I have. So it's been great. So definitely come to the lab sessions and meetings.
Yeah, I have to say this is a really great community. I'm really honored to be a part of it because I mean, I've just learned so much from people all over the world, and I don't think I could do data import without their input. And, people answer troubleshooting questions from, on Slack. Someone from Australia was like, I can't do this. And I remember it was Jen Colt who said, well, can you give me a screenshot of your job profile, which we won't have to do in the future. But she was like, well, have you considered X, Y, and Z? And they were able to solve it. And I think that's really powerful. So I also want to give kudos to, Anne-Marie, who is our PO before she retired, but also Ryan Taylor, who has just taken on kind of this massive app in scope. I mean, I'm not sure if you realize this data import touches probably, I'm not sure the percentage, it touches a lot in Folio. It goes to finance and acquisitions, to all of inventory, to source record storage, authorities, it really is, I think, a core app in what it's touching. And so its scope is rather large. And I think it's a difficult kind of beast to kind of just wrangle in and understand. So, and we are working on that. So, but questions?
Thank you. Yeah, this is great. You mentioned that your e-resource loads are now taking a lot more time than they did in your old system, and we are finding the same thing. So I was curious, what specific features maybe of data import are you most excited about in maybe reducing the time spent on this effort?
Well, I definitely have something to say about this. I can say that, improved logging, it would help, improved matching, improved error reporting. We do a lot of the, pre and post load things because it's not always possible to know what happened, especially with larger loads, based on the logs. And if something happens that is mysterious and there's no error message, it's not necessarily easier to troubleshoot in our staging or test environment than in production, but at least we didn't get any bad data in production. So we have a little bit of time to help with that. For us, it's also just performance. I know we have slicing now, but we've put a lot of effort into workarounds that aren't really going to work with slicing. So that's just not something that will help with us. So matching, improved logs, the ability to edit a lot more things faster. Yeah. Oh, sharing profiles will absolutely help. I also think that, from a management perspective and being able to report on these types of activities, having, properties that help us understand what record sets these records are a part of. You know, you saw a number of workarounds that we've all developed with the 035 second indicator nines, with the collection IDs in the 9XX fields. But these are our workarounds. And when we're doing updates or deletes, or it is it's really cumbersome to have to manage that, because there's no easy way of identifying all of the records in a collection natively in Folio, or selecting all of the records in a collection for acting upon them.
Yeah, I think it takes more time for us because there is a lack of documentation. So sometimes when I'm troubleshooting, I'm like, well, this is how I think it works. That makes sense. And they're like, where's that documented? I'm like, my head, which isn't a good example. So, logs are, they've changed. So each change, it's like, you have to get used to that change. What's happening to the processes is also changing because of the development with the stability and performance. So in the 5 colleges and UMass, we've kind of locked down permissions to data import. Like currently at UMass, it's our systems librarian and myself, where before we used to be 3 people who did the loading. And one person was diverted to, she's a coder. So she's doing, user loads and, much better stuff than e-resources. So I think that's why it takes more time too, because right now, at least in my institution, I'm the only one doing it, where before I was either or 3 people.
I have something else to say. I think that those are all excellent points. We've put a lot of time into evaluating and testing import profiles, and figured out like what works for us and what can we use that we know what to expect, and it behaves consistently over time. But getting there was really, really hard. And, we're taking the approach that change is slow, because we want to make sure that we understand what is going on. And I think that historically in the development of data import, it hasn't always been clear what was being developed, or what the requirements were, or how something was supposed to behave. And I think that that's changing, but because data import is so large, building the infrastructure around that change is going to take time too. I think that's why it's so hard to write formal documentation for data import, because I don't want to codify for the project the way that I think data import works, because that's based on my own experiences, and I don't know if that's how it was intended to work, right? But kudos to Ryan, because he's doing a great job in being super transparent, which I absolutely appreciate, and I think it's going to help us solve these problems in the long term.
Thanks. Kudos to everybody, and definitely Ryan too. Just looking at everything that's been presented today, I wonder how, and I know there's also a lab that meets pretty frequently too. I'm trying to figure out, and I didn't know if you've had any thoughts too, as to how we can apply the workflows or things that you're testing, or some of the best practices you've outlined here, to some of the test cases with regard to UATs and BugFest.
We've actually talked a little bit about that internally. I know that there's an activity going on right now to create a new and improved data set for BugFest. I think that the challenge in, have testing these best practices is that they're the same but slightly different. So coming up with a way where, if an institution wants to, like, how could we create maybe a subset of data so that works for us, that has the same properties that we have, and the data in the same form, so that we don't have to recreate that every single time, right? I mean, just look at our matching. Like at UMass, they're using the 9 in the first indicator. We're using the 9 in the second indicator, so it's slightly different. So coming up with a way to create maybe subsets of that data that are institutional specific, for testing these real world cases, right? And this is actually why I think that a lot of times we don't find some of the bugs until, we're in production locally. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with that. I find that, like the Bug Fest, what they're testing in Bug Fest is not what we're really doing in our libraries. So that, and maybe it's because like the data is not the same data that we are working on, or even the tests that they've decided to use are not the ones that we need, that we're actually doing. But we can't actually use our profiles because the data is not what we would check our profiles on. So if we, I don't know how to solve that, but I felt like with the last, with the Q relays, I feel like all those bugs that were found after people after Bugfest, like everybody had done Bugfest, we thought everything was fine, and then we found all the problems. And that's somewhat frustrating. And it was similar in Poppy. And I know, I participated in Bugfest, and I know a lot of the people who do data import did, but we still somehow miss these things. So there has to be a better way of testing. But again, it comes down to the data has to match, and the profile, like I want to be able to I want to test my profiles, the ones that I'm using. But I don't, it's not always, doesn't always work. So yeah.
I think I have probably 2 tiers of testing. So Bugfest, I generally test to make sure there are no regressions with just functionality. So it's not specific to the 5 colleges. And then if new functionality is working the way that I hope that it's working, then we have UAT for what's called our dry run. So what's delivered, we're with EBSCO. Then we test end-to-end workflows. So, we do actually, like with Poppy, we didn't go right away because we saw that, there were some red points that, we couldn't go at that moment. So we're like, no, we're going to wait for the CSP because that issue was resolved. And like CSP, I think was 3 or 4 or something like that. And that's been really helpful for us. So we have an intense 1 week, just we do everything. Can we sort the columns? Can we export and, do our transform loads, everything. So that's been helpful, but it is very intense. And I think after 2 years, I feel like I'm continually migrating. So hopefully I think maybe as development slows down and maybe 5 to 10 years, maybe that will also slow down.
Yes, thank you. I'm not doing any data import at CL. But my question, how much validation or validators can be added to the data import app be helpful to get the work done accurately? Do you think what do you have now is enough? Do you need more tasks to or more validation to be added to be assured of the quality of the data imported to the databases?
I don't know. I do think that, MarkEdit provides some excellent validation. There are obviously things that cause a problem that is not able to catch. But I think that if marked edit is not able to catch it, it's not going to be easy for us to create validation in Folio to catch it either. I mean, I'm thinking back to your earlier examples, you know, those are going to, I think that that's a, you know, that's a quality control issue, but it's not going to prevent functionality. It's not going to corrupt data any further or break anything, but it's important for discovery that we have a way of finding these things and fixing them. You know, I mean, with, you know, with the amount of data that we push through data import, I don't know that I would want any other barriers to throttle that work unless it was going, unless getting the data in to Folio was going to cause a problem. You know, we weren't going to be able to find it or edit it or fix it, or, you know, the record wasn't going to be editable. Those are the types of, I think, issues where I would prioritize, like finding a way to prevent them from getting in the system in a corrupted way. But that's my off the cuff personal opinion. I would want to think about it more.
I think sometimes we have to focus on getting the good enough data in. It can't be perfect. None of our catalogs are perfect. You know, none of us have. And if it's going to hinder us getting the records in, sometimes it, you know, it's then they're not being used, and then, you know, we're all spending lots of money on buying lots of resources. If we can't access them, then what's the point? So yeah, we have to find that balance of, you know, making things, you know, available and maybe fixing them later as needed, maybe running more reports afterwards. You know, MetaDB's been great for, you know, querying the existing data and then being able to fix it. And we've done a lot of fixes, you know, and I guess sometimes it's really the only way to do things.
Is there anything in the Zoom room? All right. I think we're at time. So I want to thank all our presenters. I guess I'm thanking myself anyway.